design, we're ready to begin construction drawings immediately after the committee buys into the design. Any questions about that?
Did they do their due diligence in terms of talking to the community and so forth?
Well, the community will be weighing in for a final time next Monday. So there's been an iterative process in place where community groups have met with the designers, they've met singly, they've met together. So we're hoping that this can move so that the construction can begin in reasonable time. Any questions from the community who are assembled here?
Can I do one before we can on the committee? Last time I was here, it didn't look like the plan was going to work for the Main Street Theater. Have they revised it such that these guys get more room back?
I don't know at this time.
All right, so when the plan comes in next Monday, if they still don't have enough room, we're not going to go ahead with construction, right? We're going to come up with a plan B?
I hope that there's enough room in the resulting design.
Well, I hope so too, but if there isn't?
Well,
well, that's why we were trying to, well, that's probably why I was thinking about if we had one of those other meeting rooms, if they had. Oh, did you check up about the floor, you know, whether or not if we could have a hardwood floor in one of the meeting rooms with a covering over it, then that would be some extra space that could be used as an alternative.
We're still trying to ram too many groups into one spot, though. I mean, that's the bottom line that nobody wants to say. We got too many people going into the same spot. I mean, suppose the Boy Scouts come back by next week and say we'd like some space too, and then Island Kids. And I mean, what happened to the original deal of the Jewish congregation, the Main Street Theater, and the Muslim groups? Didn't we have?
No, that was never the original deal. The original deal was to try to accommodate as many groups as possible. That's what the original.
Right, but it's not possible to do 4 groups. And the 3 that we were talking about when we left before the architect came back there were only 3 in there.
Well, the whole point was to rotate different groups through the different, because everyone would not always have the same meeting. And this is the way I started out. So when did it change?
Well, this is dynamic change, and of course we came forward, and we didn't.
The 4th group?
Well, the 4th group came forward.
Which is?
The Chabad.
They have always been. I mean, we've always had that problem.
Well, that brings into sharp focus the problem that we have generally, that we have limited space and unlimited needs. No matter how much space we have available. So, you know, if we can determine and figure out a way of drawing a line, maybe that would be useful if we had absolute failure in design next week. If we can't get buy-in, what do we do next? I'm not sure what the solution is at this point.
Well, to me the solution would be to say that the 2 organizations that have been there are to get grandfathered in because they've been there. The Muslims then we've been yanking them around for how long now, trying to find spots for them.
5 or 8 years, actually.
I'm sorry?
5 or 8 years.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Okay. And it seemed like we had a plan that was going to be workable with those 3 groups. Now, I'm not saying we don't get space, but I think when the Chabad, is it?
Chabad.
Okay, I mispronounced it. I'm sorry. I think we say we'll find something else for you, but right now we can't ram them in there. There just isn't enough space.
When we originally started out, it was that we were trying to have equal fairness for everyone, and that was basically what we were trying to do because of the with the state space. This is state space. I mean, you know. So we were trying to originally start with as much space as possible, or rather to accommodate as many groups as possible.
And I think that's a noble goal, but I think we're trying to get to stuff too many people in one spot. If we need more space, then I think we have to look at getting more space.
Where are we gonna get the space? It sounds like
maybe that's some related stuff.
Maybe somebody
maybe downstairs in the cultural center, in the Good Shepherd.
Somebody wanted more space for something else. At one of the meetings I was at, it was like, well, where are we going to get the grounds? We're limited with space. I know that.
I know, but I don't think we solve it by not giving any group the amount they need. I think if we can get the 3 groups in the cultural center, and it works for them, and maybe we get the 4th group and give them part of downstairs in Good Shepherd until we find some workable solution for everybody. I mean, the community is growing. These groups are going to need more space. The theater especially, I can see that growing over the years, not shrinking. And maybe it means we have to take back some of the other space.
I mean, I agree with Margie. There's just so much you can do with a certain square footage and meet the needs of everybody concerned. And I'm hopeful that, we'll be able, there's been things tossed around in terms of other space. There's a space across the street that was discussed, right? That's under Hudson related right now. There's 504, the upstairs. There's potentially, although we don't know for a fact, maybe community space in new buildings that go up. But it's, like Margie said, there's the Boy Scouts need space, Island Kids need space. There's a lot of groups that need space that are not new to the island. We're not even talking about new groups to the island. These are groups that have been around for a while.
Well,
so in this subterranean space, which is not the world's best space to begin with, I think one can just squeeze so much.
Well, originally the idea was to rotate groups through, and over time it changed.
You can't do that.
Our idea was that. You basically, who's to say it's not going to work? My idea is, I'm not saying that it's going to work, and we were supposed to find, probably had to schedule different things. Now, if I were a member of the Island Kids or another group, I would be very upset now if I find that I'm not even considered at all in the works. I understand that we have the other groups that's been here forever, and I am a favorite of the theater, but I personally think we should all think of everything. We have to think about all the groups.
We do, but that doesn't mean we have to put them all in the same spot.
But then we still need to accommodate the other groups. They have to be accommodated.
We do.
And when we come up with an accommodation, then I'll be able to make a decision. Yes.
I just want to remind the RIOC board, and I shouldn't have to remind anybody else. We sat here in January, and Steve Sharon has said, and it's on the record, that once the work was completed, the initial groups that would go back right away would be the theater and the Jewish congregation. Then the Muslim organization was added, and Chabad was a surprise addition for most of us. At that point, we sat here in this room, first through the Operations Committee meeting, and then when it was moved to real estate, to talk about how the 3 organizations, to begin with, the theater, the Jewish congregation, and then the Muslims, could use the space, and that's, what formed the initial meetings that we had. And I think many of us who are sitting here were under the impression that, the right of first return, if you will, you referred to the term grandfathering, was that, we would try, the first 2 organizations would go back, and then the other organizations would be added, and that there would be shared space for everybody. So I think, there are many groups that would like to have space there too, but I think, the first thing that ought to happen is, first, the work needs to be done, or everything needs to be approved, and the work itself needs to be done. And then the groups that were there originally, as per Steve sitting here at this meeting with you guys present, the first 2 groups need to move back in with their new neighbors. And then if you want to add and filter in some more groups, you should do that. But, I think the original tenants, as you said, ought to be able to go back in and resume their operations with the addition of the third group at this point, which was the Muslim organization. I think Margie and
And I
Kathy
believe
are
there,
right.
wasn't there a floor plan that worked for all of you when it was just the three groups?
Well,
When we did something with the.
We never saw one.
no,
There may have been an internal one.
I thought there was, because we did something with the, storage or something.
that was the
together.
that was the meeting that we had on the 25th, where we saw the most recent floor plan with some of the changes, that additional changes had to be made, which is why we're having our next meeting next Monday to see the latest version of the plans,
Because right now,
with observance space and with, other kinds of things added in.
Prior to that, the architect came back with a
We
written
already made
description of his understanding of what
Oh,
each
I
group
did,
needed.
I thought he came back.
And that was the three groups, that was the three groups.
Okay.
And we gave a written, we had individual meetings.
Because it looked to me like that was.
But that wasn't an actual diagram, it was a written.
I'm gonna ask Owen to speak, and then this is not going to be resolved today. We need to see the plan next Monday. We've heard your concerns, and we need to advance our thoughts on these things, depending on what we get. If we can get a viable plan, that's one thing. If we can't, then we have to basically allow something to exist for the groups that have some history and some have been earlier involved in the process. What I'm saying is, if we get a plan that's not going to work, then we'll have to excuse Chabad, and as we've excused the Muslim organization for any number of years, where we didn't have something viable, trying first one space then another, in an attempt to offer them something, because they also have a growing community of well over 100 families, I understand. So,
Yeah, I just wanted to remind, which I'm sure I don't have to, the meeting that we had last time with the plan as it was presented. We wouldn't be able to run our programs the way that they are running right now today, with the limited amount of space that was allotted to the Main Street Theater Dance Alliance. It would essentially, as Steve had said, he didn't want to be the one to tell the community that Main Street Theater was not going back into 548. In the floor plan that was presented, Main Street Theater, the head of Main Street Theater is going back into 548, and the body of Main Street Theater is being left in the street to squirm and die. And it's only a matter of time until Main Street Theater would I'm an actor, sorry.
Clearly.
And so it's only a matter of time until the program of Main Street Theater just shrivels up and goes away. In an expanding community, Main Street Theater should be expanding and thriving, not contracting and dying away. This community needs Main Street Theater. We're implementing a new dance program in our local school. It's starting a week from Wednesday for African American dance for the third graders. These things won't happen if Main Street Theater doesn't exist. Also, I go back about 6 months, however, when we first when you pulled me aside and on the street and talked to me about your idea of going back to opening the 548 as a cultural center. And I at the time was excited about the whole idea of a cultural center and expanding the cultural offerings to the community. And you're saying that you're opening the 548 to the whole community. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. I didn't. The way that this is turned, though, and I want to be very, very clear that I think that the Islamic congregation and the Orthodox Jewish congregation are very important, and the Roosevelt Island Jewish congregation are very important organizations for this community, and they absolutely need to exist, and they absolutely need space, and they absolutely should be granted that space. But in this process, the cultural center idea has gone the way of the dodo, and what's being created is a new religious space. And the one real cultural aspect element that will live in 548 is the Main Street Theater and Dance Alliance. It's the one organization that reaches beyond racial, beyond religion, beyond socioeconomic, and it pulls people from all corners of this island, and it brings people together. And just by virtue of the nature of religious organizations, they're exclusionary. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, but religious organizations, if you don't believe like an Orthodox Jewish person, or if you don't believe like an Islamic person, it's not opening up this community center to the community. It's taking 60% of it and sequestering it off to fractions of the community. It's not opening it up to the community at all. It's not the idea that you had 6 months ago when you were saying you were going to first open 548 for the community. The one element that exists down there will be the Main Street Theater that crosses all boundaries, and that element is being truncated to the point where we will cease to exist. And then you'll have a religious center, and then you'll have additional space to put whoever you want, because Main Street Theater won't live anymore. It's a 30-year-old organization that's necessary for this island, and we need the space to operate our programs. You're trying to shove 10 pounds of sugar into a 5-pound bag. It just isn't going to work.
Okay, we'll do it.
Sugar wax.
Percentage of space, you're getting 60% of the space?
We had in the old plan, which I'm I'll freely admit, we were not using all of the space. We weren't using it optimally. In some cases we weren't using it at all. And so in that drawing that I gave, that shook the rafters for unknown reasons, it gave back probably 35% of the space that we were actually occupying at the time, which represented the absolute minimum requirements of the Main Street Theater living in that space, and that was reality. Had I known that was going to be taken as the negotiating chip, and that's my first offer, and then shrunk up even more, well, this is what you actually get, I wouldn't have given up anything, and we would have ended up we would have had a completely different thing. I did in good faith what I was asked to do, and shrunk our storage, our everything that we own, and shrunk it into a space that was actually operational.
It will be.
So giving up. You know, I'm listening to you, and you're not gonna. Nothing's gonna really be done today until we get the report from the architect.
Sure.
But you have to realize too that in all this time, you're gonna give up space. You're giving up space. You have not been paying rent. It has been something that has been given to you, and yes, it is for the community. And what makes it grand is because it is for the children, as far as I'm concerned. As long as it's for the children, and you have me, I'm more supportive because it is the children. However, when you say you're giving, you're going to have to remember that you were giving space.
But they've been keeping it up all these years.
Yes, well,
But you guys have been keeping it up all these years. It's just like the Catholic Church has been doing. They maintain
just like you clean, just like when you rent, you do things in your apartment.
I don't put an air conditioner in.
No, you don't.
Excuse me, we've been paying for every bit of utilities, cleaning, insurance on that space, so it's far from free because the last, we won't tell you what the insurance and ventilating cost is, so it's not free. And if your friends at RIOC, if our dear friends at RIOC had ever decided to bill us correctly for utilities, we would have paid them, but RIOC never found out a way to bill us for electric, and I can go back 20 years. So I've been there since day one, and I really resent us being told that we're not cultural, the synagogue's not cultural, so we should go away and it should just become the Main Street Theater. And that's not what we want.
That's not what I'm saying. That is not what I'm saying.
But wait a minute, I think since we're being recorded here, one of the things that the record ought to reflect, and I can't sit quietly, and I know we're going to have more conversation about this. One of the things you just said, Owen, that just is so hurtful is that religious groups are exclusionary. And having been your neighbor for the past 20 years or so in the cultural center, taking up a very little amount of space and trying to conduct ourselves in the most positive way possible, we are a very inclusionary congregation, and we are not exclusionary in the least. And I think that those are very dangerous words to use in any forum. I think we've been wonderful neighbors. We have been we have done the best possible
Dina,
job.
that's not how he meant it.
But I know, but
But
it's
that's
but
not how
but,
it was.
but it's on the record, and
You're
it
absolutely
provoked
right.
some other
Okay.
conversation, and that's not a good
You're not a
thing.
good
I
neighbor.
don't disagree.
Okay, I
Okay,
just
can we have,
I understand.
okay, so I wanted Owen to have last say on this. This is a complicated issue for the community. I'm glad to hear that you can get space and use space over at the school, which is not an option for
We're not actually,
We're
no,
not
we're
saying that.
implementing a program for the school, for their
kids.
third grade.
They're not
Okay.
there.
Okay,
But
great.
it's not-
Okay, now I
we're-
understand, thank you.
We're providing the program.
So, next Monday we'll have we'll schedule a meeting of the committee where the architect's plan will be presented.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
During one of the first meetings on this particular issue, I believe Don, acting as general counsel and acting president, made a statement that the future use of the space was subject to the Public Authorities Act, and that future uses would have to be put out to bid for an RFP. Is that no longer the case?
I don't recall saying that. You'd have to direct me to what I said and we could take a look at it.
It was very early in the conversation, and it had to do with the possibility of whether or not we would have to reply to an RFP, come back into the space, or whether there would be some other system for either licensing or permitting us for the theater and the Jewish congregation and anybody else who wanted to come back in. And that was one of the very early meetings, and that was said by
Well, you could point me back to it and we could take a look at
okay,
it.
well, somebody
Well-
keeps the record of that.
I agree
so.
with it, it was it, yeah.
So
But
just
I-
as a matter of discussion, do you think that the Public Authorities Act applies in this particular?
This is the question you've been asking in emails for
Yes.
the past 2 weeks.
No,
Yes.
he's talking about he's been asking me about the garden club. Now we're talking about the
But
culture.
it also
In the Public Authorities Act, you gotta look at the intent of the law. The intent of the law was not to let individuals be given land. It started with the Erie Canal, and when people were giving away big tracts of land to private institutions. What they're trying to do is make sure that there are no big land giveaways. It doesn't mean a community like us can't take some public space and allocate it to individual groups so that it runs like a community, like the General Development Plan said it's supposed to. It's supposed to have some religious space, it's supposed to have cultural space, it's supposed to have a space for the arts, just library, things that communities need.
But is that a legal opinion, or is that just a policy
That's a
opinion?
Margie Smith opinion, okay?
All right, but it's not a.
You have to look at the intent of the law.
But just going, please, you see right here the conversation among competing groups, and you were trying to find an equitable way of dividing up the space among these all very useful and valuable groups. And without a coherent plan to divide it up, it's going to be unfair to somebody. So perhaps that's the purpose of the public.
Even with a coherent plan, it's going to be unfair to somebody.
But if you have the Public Authorities Act putting out an RFP, that's not an
Are
arbitrary.
you suggesting that the use of the space be dominated by the highest bidder?
It doesn't have public
sublet
it
out? What are you saying?
No, the Public Authorities Act doesn't require you to put it out to the highest bidder. You can manage whatever criteria you want. You could say, it doesn't have to be.
Well, thank
I'm
you.
just throwing this out to you and
Thank
asking
you.
you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next item. Good Shepherd